So we've kind of looked at NPM from a high level. What we'll do is we'll create a simple node file, and then we'll look at using NPM, both installing a local package just for our own project, as well as we'll then look at how do we install a global package that we can use across projects. So the first thing we'll do, we'll just create a fairly simple file. We'll create a really kind of simple tax calculator file, but we'll start as just a static page. We'll add some of that functionality. So we'll create a new JavaScript file. We'll give it a simple name. We'll call it could call it simple JavaScript. You know what? Actually, let me see what I want to call it. Okay, we'll still call it server.js, just like we did last week with our little hello world web server example. We'll call it server. First, we're going to link to Node's HTTP library to run a web server. So we did this last week. We could use. So we'll require the HTTP library. So we're repeating what we did last week. We're creating our server, and we're going to use a callback function here. So this function will run and listen for events. And the event it's going to listen for is a request event, and it will emit a response. So in the response object, we're going to write a header with a status code of 200. We said last week, and we talked about it last semester, that 200 is the HTTP status code for an OK response. And we'll write a really simple HTML response. We'll just wrap it in an H1 tag. And we just call response dot. So this is almost exactly what we did last week, except we wrote hello world instead. And I think we had also set the content type to text plain. We'll just leave it out in this case. Not required. And then we have to do one more thing down here on line 13. This creates the server. What else do we have to do? We don't, well, actually, almost the opposite. We don't want to close the connection. We want our server to listen for request events, right? We talked about that event loop in the little code school video from last week. So our HTTP library also has a listen, and we can specify an HTTP port to use. We used 3000 last week. I'm going to use 3000 consistently because when we come to using Express, that's the default port for Express is 3000. So start a local web server running on port 3000, and every time a request comes in, send a response with an OK status code and print out an H1 tag. So how would we execute this file and get our server running? So I'll try this out now. We're not using npm yet. Yeah, node and server. That'll run our file. And our file starts our HTTP server on port 3000 and listens for events. So nothing's happening in my command prompt, but my command prompt is locked now. Cursor's blinking. I can't type any more commands here right now. My server's running. So to check it, we can just load up a browser. I'll open a new tab and hit localhost 3000. So it serves this HTML response. Now, one of the problems we looked at briefly last week, when we created a file and tried running it in the browser, what happens if we go back to our code editor and we change the file? And then we refresh it. Let's say we say, you know what, that H1, it's kind of big. We want to shrink that down to an H2. So if I go back into my file and save it, my server's still running. I don't have to execute the file again. My server's still listening for requests. What will happen if we refresh the file? Will our heading be an H1 or will it change to an H2? So we've changed the code, we've saved it, yet it's still giving us H1. Why did it still give us H1 even though we've saved a change? Blair? Yeah, because the server is still active, so it's still serving the old version. So this is a big pain when we're developing, to have to constantly stop and restart the server. So Node, there's an npm package we want to install that will monitor our files for changes and automatically restart every time we save a change. So we don't have to stop and restart again and again. So I need to stop my server manually now because that's the only way I can do it. So if I hit Control-C, if you're on OS X, it's Command-C, I believe. It's still Control-C, thank you. So when I hit Control-C, notice now my command prompt comes back, it takes me in. And if I refresh my browser, I'm going to get a not found because we've shut the server off. In fact. And if I refresh. Now, if I start my server again, are we going to get H1 or H2 this time? Yeah, now we should get H2. So if I just hit the up arrow, takes me back, we'll run our server again. And now we got an H2. But we had to do a stop and restart in order for that change to take effect. So this is terribly inefficient. So we want to use NodeMon so that we don't have to do any more server restarts. NodeMon will just restart automatically. So we want to install a package. Should we install this package locally in this folder or should we install it globally? If the purpose of the package is to watch for changes and restart. Yeah, let's install it globally. Sarah, why globally? Right, we're going to use it all the time, not specific to this project. So when we do the install, we're going to want to use the global kind of flag. So I'm going to stop my server with Control-C. I'll bring my command prompt up a little bit, actually clear it out. If ever your command gets too long and you want to clear stuff out, you can use CLS. That will wipe out all the previous commands. So we're kind of starting with a clean window. So before we install the package, we want to initialize npm. And what initializing npm is going to do I know it's a little hard to see here, but we can blow this up. When we initialize npm, it's going to give us a little wizard to create a package.json file. So this will track all of the dependencies. I guess we don't need this yet if we're going to install globally. Okay. So if we want to install globally, we'll come back to package.json. We can do npm I, and the utility, the package we want to install is called nodemon, short for node monitor. So it monitors our source code for changes and will automatically restart if any files are saved. And lastly, as Sarah said, we want this globally, so it's available. So we want to add the -g. If we don't add -g, it will install nodemon, but only for this project. If we want to use it next week in a different project, we have to reinstall it again. So nodemon, this will be one of the few things, along with the express generator, we'll install globally. Most things are going to be specific to one project. But a few utilities we want to use widely, so we'll install them globally. So we're going to do npm I nodemon space -g. I don't think it matters. I think if you put -g before nodemon, it still works. Doesn't matter which order you do this in. I'll hit enter. So this is going to go out to npm, find the nodemon package, and grab the source code from GitHub. And you can see where it puts it. If we go and look at my folder, we don't actually see nodemon in our local folder because we didn't install it locally. We've installed it globally. So when we install something globally, where does it go? You can actually see in the path. It goes to our user. If you're on Windows, your user account, app data roaming npm node modules. And then it creates a folder for the package. So this is where we find it. And it says nodemon has a few optional dependencies. It skipped them. We don't need them. And it shows us this version. And nodemon, if we go to npm and look, and the packages are tagged, so this is tagged as a development tool. So nodemon has 10 dependencies. So it's a wrapper for node. It also means that the command we use for running our applications will be a little different. We no longer want to start them using the node command. We want to start our applications using nodemon instead, because nodemon allows auto restarts, which node does not. So let's restart our application, and then we'll save a change to it, and we'll see how nodemon works. So in this case, we just write the command nodemon server. So start the server, but watch for changes, and restart if any changes happen. So notice it tells us what version it's using. It's watching everything in the directory, any changes to JS files, MJS, or JSON files. Starting the server. My page should be back online. Shrink this down. And maybe we'll change our H2 tag again. This time we'll change it to H3. Now watch my command, my terminal. As soon as I click File, or actually just hit Control S. In green, nodemon is restarting due to changes. If I go back and refresh, my heading shrunk automatically. So I don't have to do a stop and a restart now if we make changes to the code. NodeMon will do it for us.
Nick and I both have our raw HTML page instead of the header. Syntax.
Check your syntax here. You didn't miss like an angled bracket or something? So H1 works. What if you change the message inside the tag? Yes, Chrome does a lot more caching by default than Firefox does. It may be a Chrome cache issue. So not only does Chrome invade your privacy, but yes, by default, because it wants to be fast, it caches a lot of stuff. Also notorious for caching your CSS is Chrome. So when you make changes and you refresh, you say, what happened to the CSS changes I just made? Okay. So let's add some code in here. We want to make this kind of a working file. What we want to do is be able to pass in a numeric value to this page and have our little calculator calculate and display the amount of tax and a total. So if we bought something for $100, it would say the total subtotal was 100, the tax was $13, and the grand total was $113. And then we'll add another NPM package, but this will be a local package that we're only using for this project. We don't need it in other projects. So we'll look at how do we configure that. So before we do, we're going to make some more changes to the file. So we're going to add another dependency here. So we want to be able to call our file like this. Actually, I guess it would just be. So we want to be able to add a parameter with a value on the end of it. And then we need to be able to parse that value and perform some math with it. So Node comes with a library called HTTP. It also comes with a library called URL. Now the semicolons here, I'm getting these little yellow warnings. WebStorm wants me to terminate those statements with semicolons, but in newer versions of JavaScript, it's not required. So you can include them if you like, you can omit them if you like. My code editor is warning me I should put them in, but I don't have to. So now after we output our heading, we want to read the subtotal variable, subtotal parameter from the URL string. So we're going to take the requested URL so this will give us the parameter value, part of the URL after the question mark. This will give it to us as a string. Because we could have multiple parameters on the URL. We could have like a currency parameter as well. We'll keep it simple with one. So then we're interested in what's the actual subtotal value. So we have this thing as a string. If we were in PHP, we would just use get subtotal. So we want to get the parameter value with the name subtotal. So if we pass in this URL, our subtotal variable should equal 100. We pass in 1,000, our subtotal variable will equal 1,000. Then we need to do a little bit of math. So we can read a number. We want to multiply that number times 0.13. And then we want to add that tax value onto the subtotal to calculate a grand total, including tax. Tax is 13%. So if we multiply that value by 0.13, that will give us the tax. Right? If our total is 100, our tax value would be 13. So I'm going to save the file. NodeMon should automatically restart. You can see I've saved as we go. We can see a whole bunch of restart messages. If we refresh. And just for a minute, just to display, let's check our tax value. Oh, oops, sorry. We have to change our URL if we want to test this. Because right now we're just calling the root. We now need to pass in a subtotal. Let's pass in 1,000 or 100. So right now we're not getting anything. Let's just see the value. Right. So what happens if we then want to display, let's see if our calculation's actually working. Okay, so that's good. If I pass in 100, it gives me a value of 13. If I pass in a value of, so I'll put the code back up. If I pass in 200, it gives me 26, so that's good. So how would we calculate the total? We have a subtotal and we have a tax amount. We'll just add them together. Subtotal, tax. I'll maybe wrap each one of these in an H4. So I'll create 4 subheadings and we'll display our values. Every time I save, NodeMon just restarts. One of the other useful things about NodeMon is, let's say I forget a bracket. So I've got a syntax problem here. If I save, NodeMon actually crashes and tells me what's wrong. So much like the Visual Studio, the .NET compiler, right? We can't build and run if you have a syntax error. Your code doesn't compile in Visual Studio, doesn't compile in Node either. So NodeMon will tell you this. My code editor tells me I'm missing a bracket, and the server, it crashes and it says, we'll start again when you fix it. So if I put my bracket back, Control S, it restarts. So NodeMon is actually going to help catch a lot of your syntax errors. I'll just try to refresh here. So I get 200 in. And if I refresh, okay, it sort of worked. We don't get an error, we get values everywhere. What's wrong? Right, so what's it doing instead for our total? How'd you like to get this bill? That'd be $20,026, please, for your $200 purchase. Right, okay, so remember, this is one of the important things about JavaScript. It's loosely typed. It's not that JavaScript has no notion of data types, but they're not explicit. They're implicit. So JavaScript, in this case, it says, okay, we're multiplying this value by a number so we can do the math. But here it says, I don't know what this is, so these are probably strings. Let's concatenate them together. So what we probably want to do instead is we need to parse all of these. So what we should probably do in each case is use Parsefloat as a wrapper around the values. If we right away make this a floating point, then it should not append here. It should know, JavaScript should be able to just making that one change. We could call Parsefloat on all three of these. I don't think we need to. I think as soon as we do it here, because we're using this value here and here, it's going to know those are both numeric. So it wouldn't be wrong to call Parsefloat everywhere, but it isn't necessary. As long as that first variable we're saying, okay, treat this one as a floating point number, it knows any other place we try to do math, it'll treat it as a number rather than a string. So I've just added this Parsefloat on line 18 here. So now we've got a working calculator. We got a quick little reminder of how JavaScript treats data types, which is useful. This is a common error when we're working with JavaScript, right? We want to perform math. JavaScript will do a concatenation because we haven't been explicit that we're working with numeric values. So we have Parsefloat. What if we're working with whole numbers? We wouldn't use Parsefloat. What would we use instead? Yeah, so JavaScript has a Parsefloat method and a parseInt method if we're working with whole numbers. We can use parseInt. Parsefloat will work though. So for example, if we, rather than 200, let's say it was 198 and 99, right? Our Parsefloat can handle it. Just doesn't handle it very nicely from a UI point of view. Right. So we want to deal with this. It's working, but it looks terrible. So we're going to use another NPM package, but this one we're not going to install globally because we don't really need it outside of this project. We only need it to fix the formatting. We want to round the numbers. We also want to format them as currency. So yes, we could stick a $sign in front or a yen sign or a rupee sign or some other symbol, but there's actually a package we can use, we can put in our project that'll take care of both the symbol functionality as well as the number formatting. So it looks better. So we're going to use this package. There's a whole bunch of them that could do the same thing. This one worked well. We're going to use the accounting package, which is a formatting library for numbers, money, and currency. It's been running for quite a while. The package is 5 years old, but I think it's still updated regularly. Still used commonly, 160,000 weekly downloads. So for this one, what we want to do before we install it is we want Node to create a package.json file that will keep track of all of the local dependencies on our project. What packages do we need and what versions are we using? So there's a tool at the command line that's pretty simple to use. I'm going to make my command window bigger. So I need to stop my server for a minute. So when you're using NodeMon and you hit Control-C, it doesn't stop right away. It actually says yes or no, are you sure you want to stop the server? So I'll hit Control-C and I'll say yes. I need my command prompt unlocked for a minute before we restart. So just hit Control-C and it defaults to, do you want to terminate? So I'll say yes. So my server's offline now. If I refresh my browser, I'm going to get localhost not found. Clear out my terminal. So we want to initialize Npm. And these commands are all in the slides from lesson 1, so you guys have those as a reference. So the command we want to run is npm init. Much like git init, let's initialize npm. And it says this utility will walk us through creating a package.json file. We don't have to write any code, it's pretty simple. So first it says, what do you want to call the name of your package? And it defaults to the name of our folder. So you can change this if you like. If you want to accept that default value in the round brackets, you just hit enter. What version of the project is this? Defaults, again, to 100. That's a pretty good starting version. No point starting at version 47. So just hit enter. Give it a description. If you want to leave it blank, hit enter. If you want to put something in, I'll just hit enter. We don't need it. Entry point. So what's our startup file? And it finds alphabetically, I think, the first file in our project, which is called close function. We don't want this as our entry file. What file do we want to run instead? Yeah, we want server.js to be our entry file. So when you run the project, load the server file as the default. Test command, that's for unit testing. We don't really need that for right now. We'll just hit enter. If we've already connected our folder to GitHub, it finds the remote, which is cool because if we publish our source code, we publish our work, package.json tells the user, here's where the source is. There's the Git repo. Because everything on NPM Bass was asking about this. He said, you know, is everything open source? The answer is yes. So all of the packages, the source is on GitHub. So I'll just hit enter. If you haven't connected yours to Git, that's fine. You can always add that later. And we could add keywords as well. Because if we want to publish this to NPM, we can basically add tags if we want people to find our package and use it in their projects. We're not really doing that, so I'm just going to hit enter, author, hit enter, and then it gives us several choices for different open source licensing schemas. The default is the ISC license. I'll just hit enter. And then it gives us a preview. So here's what package.json will look like. Here's our app name and version. Here's our entry point or startup file. We didn't specify any kind of unit test. And the repository is on Git. And this is where, if users use our code, this is where they can report issues. And there's the home page, my README file. Is it okay if I hit enter? It now creates package.json, and I'll WebStorm saying, hey, do you want to add this file to Git? I'll say yes. So here's the package.json that looks exactly like what the preview showed. So it doesn't list any packages. There's no dependencies yet because we haven't installed any dependencies. We want to now install that accounting package. And npm will automatically list it here as a dependency. Blair? Check in your Windows directory if it's here. Go and look in Windows and see if the file's there. It may just not be showing up in your code editor yet. So in Windows, do you see it here? So go to your folder where all your files are and see if it's there. It may just take a minute before it shows up. Which, are you using WebStorm or a different editor, Blair? WebStorm? Okay. Ah, okay. Yes, you can click the actual folder. And there's an option here that says if you right click, there's reload from disk. So that should refresh the list of files, and package.json should be there. So now we want to install the accounting package only in our lesson 2 folder. We don't need it globally. So I can run the command npm I or npm install, whichever you like. I type 7 characters, and you can type 1. npm I accounting. That's the name of the package. The command is npm I accounting. We're not using -g because this isn't global. It's only going in for the lesson 2 project. So it's pretty small. It added 1 package. Here's the version number. And now if I click on my project folder, thank you, Sarah, for the tip, you'll notice a couple things. We now have a node modules subfolder. Didn't exist before. And inside of node modules, here's a copy of the accounting package source code that we just downloaded from Git. And inside of my package.json, this got added at the bottom. We now have a dependencies node, and it lists accounting 04.1 or greater. So our project needs at least this version. It's not going to work with accounting 4.0 or 3.9 or anything else. 4.1 or higher we need to have. So this automatically gets updated. We don't do this manually. So when you download someone's node project from Git, you won't have all of their node modules. You'll just have a list of the node modules in package.json. And then we can do a restore to get our own copy of all the dependencies. So I'm going to start my server again with NodeMon, and then we want to use that accounting library to fix our currency formatting. To round down to 2 zeros and put in our currency symbol. So I'm going to run the NodeMon command again. This should be the last command we need to run in the terminal today. I want to restart the server, and then I'll just minimize. So this file's auto-generated, really. We don't generally need to change it manually too much. Occasionally, but not a lot. So now we want to link to this accounting library, and then it has a function we want to call that will format all of our values as currency. So we want to include the accounting npm package we installed. we installed locally for this project only. So we include it just like we included the previous libraries. Just a simple require statement, assign that equal to a variable. So now we want to use this variable that represents the whole package. So if we look at the documentation, it's got some formatting methods. We don't want format number. We'll see if it's in this documentation. Sometimes all the documentation's on GitHub. So let's go. We'll have a quick look at the source on Git. And if we look at the methods, this is what we want. We want to call the format money method. So here's a simple example. We call accounting.formatMoney. We pass in a value, and that's what it looks like. So we're going to call this method 3 times. First for the subtotal, second for the tax, and third for the total. You could even specify certain currencies. We wanted it in British pounds, for example. So we're going to call the format money function and wrap each of our 3 numeric values inside it. If I hit save, NodeMon should auto restart. So I don't need to go back to the terminal. And if I refresh, our package has done that simple formatting for us. We have the $sign and our values are rounded to 2 decimals like it should be. So we've used NPM in 2 different ways. We've installed a global utility that we can use every week in all our projects. And we've installed a local utility that we need to extend and improve the functionality of this week's project. So if we create another project next week, if we want to use accounting, we're going to have to install it again in the lesson 3 folder. Right now, it's only local to lesson 2 inside of node modules. So all of the setup of the creating of the node modules, downloading the code, creating the package.json, NPM does most of this stuff for us. We don't have to do a lot. There's not really much more to it than what we've already just done. Does anybody have any questions about how NPM works or how we might want to use it inside our node applications?
Familiar with Webpack?
Yes.
What is the significance of it?
What Webpack is used, it basically pulls in a lot of commonly used utilities. So if you install Webpack, for example, it will automatically include things like jQuery and Bootstrap, I believe, in your project. I haven't used it a lot, so I'm not an expert on it, but it'll include those things automatically. So in much the same way with Visual Studio, when you create a project template, it automatically gives you things like jQuery, Bootstrap. Webpack will sort of do a similar thing on a smaller scale. Webpack can also be used it has a utility like NodeMon is not the only utility that will watch for changes. And if you notice, when we started with NodeMon, it says it's watching JS, MJS, and JSON files. But later on, when like our front end files are not going to have .js extensions. So if you change things in the UI, NodeMon doesn't do a restart, auto restart in that case. Okay. Whereas Webpack will watch the front end for changes. Okay, so if we added CSS here, NodeMon doesn't care, whereas Webpack would, or we added front end stuff. Okay, so Webpack is pretty powerful. I'm glad you brought up, sorry, Dustin? Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good question, actually mentioning both Webpack and Babel. It's actually a good thing for us to be thinking about for the end of the semester, because you remember we talked about last week, or for those of you who weren't here, there's no final exam in the class. The last few weeks, you guys are doing 1-hour tutorials. So I have some ideas of what those tutorials might be on, but Webpack would be a great one, right? You with a few other people do a 1-hour demo, show us how do we use web, what is it, and how do we, do a simple example and help us get it working. That would be a good thing. I might cover it, but if I don't, that would definitely be a good thing. You know, so there's other tools we might not use, things like Yarn, Grunt, Gulp. There's a whole bunch of automation tools for JavaScript. So there's some different ones. So we could look at some brief 1-hour lessons on how do we use some of those other tools. So think about, hey, what other kinds of things have I heard of that I might be interested in? And maybe you can explore it and help show the rest of us how to use it over the last few weeks. Okay. And Webpack is one actually I don't think I've ever had anybody do in this class before. So that'd be a good one. We can put it on the list. So typically what we'll do is we'll create a list of topics and I'll give everybody kind of 3 choices. Like these are the 3 topics that interest me the most. And then we'll figure out who's gonna lead which tutorials. And I'm totally open to suggestions about what kinds of things you want to look at doing. Okay, I was gonna give you a lab to do, but I wanted to do a little bit of a refresher on some basic concepts in JavaScript before I gave you the lab. And we didn't have time to do that, that's fine. So I'm gonna update the lab's due date and it will be next week. Okay, so you don't have to do the lab now. So we'll kind of go over some of those things. We may even wind up doing the lab in class next week. It's not that long. You got to write about 20 or 30 lines of JavaScript to do it. Okay, so nothing this week. We'll look at some of those fundamentals next week and we'll kind of carry on with some of the things we've been doing this week. Okay, that's it. I will push everything up to Git. Have a great week. I'll see most of you Monday and the rest of you I'll see on Tuesday. Okay. We will have a small review quiz in 2 weeks on the first 3 lessons. Probably be short answer format.